The Dralethian warship Molten Vengeance cut through the void like a blade of forged obsidian, its angular hull bristling with segmented armor plating and glowing conduits of molten steel. The vessel was a fortress of brutalist design, every edge sharpened for war, every surface etched with the scars of countless battles. At its heart, the great forge core pulsed with an angry orange, red light, casting long shadows across the command deck, where High Commander Dralethian stood motionless, his armored fingers curled around the railing. The signal had been repeating for 3 cycles now, a weak, distorted transmission emanating from the wreckage, drifting in the dead zone between star systems. It was an anomaly. Nothing should have survived out here. Analysis. Dralethian's voice was a low growl, the harmonics of his native tongue vibrating through the metallic chamber. Vashdor, the ship's lead scientist, adjusted the holographic display with a flick of his clawed fingers. The data streamed in jagged lines, erratic and corrupted. The signature is unfamiliar. Commander, not Dralethian. Not any known species in the Accord. Dralethian's crest of hardened plates flexed in irritation. The dead zone was a graveyard, a place where even the bravest scavengers dared not linger. Yet something had died here, something unknown. Bring us closer. The Molten Vengeance maneuvered with the precision of a predator, its thrusters flaring as it closed the distance. The wreckage resolved into view, a shattered vessel, its design unlike anything in the archives. The hull was smooth where Dralethian ships were segmented, curved where theirs were angular. Strange markings, faded but still visible, spiraled across its broken surface. Vashdor's breath hissed through his filtration vents. This is impossible. Dralethian felt it too. The creeping unease, the instinctive recoil at something wrong. The wreck was old, far older than it should have been. The metal was pitted with micrometeorite impacts, the edges worn smooth by time. Yet the signal still pulsed, weak, flickering. Life signs? None detected. But Vashdor hesitated. There is power, residual, faint, but active. Dralethian's claws flexed. A dead ship should not whisper. Prepare a boarding party. The boarding pod locked onto the derelict with a shudder, its magnetic clamps biting into the alien metal. The Dralethian warriors moved in perfect formation, their armored forms illuminated by the flickering glow of their plasma torches. The interior of the wreck was a tomb, twisted corridors, collapsed bulkheads, the skeletal remains of long-dead crew fused to the walls by some catastrophic force. And then they found it, a chamber, sealed. The door bore the same strange markings as the hull, but here they were clearer. Vashdor traced the markings with a trembling claw. This matches the ancient warnings, the Kethor texts. Dralethian's blood ran cold. The Kethor were myth, nightmares from the oldest archives, demons who had scourged the stars before the first Dralethian Empire had risen. The plasma torch cut through the seal with a hiss. The door groaned, then slid aside. And inside, nestled within a nest of dead machinery, was a single intact pod. A weak, struggling sound, like a dying heartbeat. Vashdor's scanner flared. Commander, there is something alive in there. Dralethian stepped forward, his war instincts screaming at him to destroy it, to purge this abomination before it could wake. But curiosity stayed his hand. Bring it aboard. The pod was heavy, cold. The surface was smooth, unmarred by time. As they carried it back to the Molten Vengeance, Dralethian could not shake the feeling that they had just opened a door that should have remained sealed. And somewhere, in the dark between stars, something stirred. The pod pulsed, a slow, rhythmic thrum, like the heartbeat of some great beast. It sat in the center of the Molten Vengeance's containment bay, bathed in the dim orange glow of emergency lighting. The Dralethians had placed it there with reverence and terror, as though handling a live warhead. Dralethian circled it, his armored boots clicking against the deck. His instincts warred, one moment urging him to crack it open, the next screaming at him to jettison it into the void. The pod's surface was unnaturally smooth, untouched by the ravages of time. No scorch marks, no corrosion, just cold, seamless metal that drank in the light. Vashdor adjusted his scanner, the device whirring, as it struggled to penetrate the pod's outer shell. His crest of metallic spines twitched in agitation. The readings are inconsistent, organic matter inside, but the energy signature is artificial, augmented. Dralethian's claws flexed. Augmented how? Vashdor hesitated, like it was built to survive. A chill slithered down Dralethian's spine. The Kethor were not supposed to be real. They were cautionary tales whispered in the dark to frighten hatchlings. Demons who had burned worlds, who had waged war against the cosmos itself. And now one lay dormant in his ship. He reached out, pressing a claw against the pod's surface. The metal thrummed beneath his touch, vibrating with latent energy. A seam split along the pod's side, venting a cloud of freezing mist. The Dralethians recoiled, weapons snapping up. The mist curled across the deck, creeping like a living thing before dissipating into the air. Inside, wreathed in frost, lay a figure. Dralethian had seen records of them, primitive, soft-skinned creatures who had barely mastered fusion when the Dralethian Empire had already spanned 1,000 systems. But this one was different. Its body was encased in blackened armor, segmented and reinforced. The plating fused to its flesh in places. Wires snaked beneath its skin, pulsing with faint blue light. A breathing apparatus covered its face. The mask cracked but still functional, and its chest rose and fell. Vashdor's scanner shrieked. "Commander, its vitals are spiking." The human's fingers twitched. Then its eyes snapped open. Dralethian had fought in 100 battles. He had faced enemies that could shatter steel with their bare hands, had stared down the maws of beasts that could swallow a warrior whole. But nothing had ever looked at him like this. The human's gaze was sharp, calculating, not the wild panic of a cornered animal, but the cold focus of a predator assessing its prey. Too fast, it lunged, ripping free of the pod's restraints in a single motion. The Dralethian guards fired. Plasma bolts seared the air, but the human was already twisting, rolling behind a console. The shots slammed into the pod, superheating the metal. Dralethian snarled, bringing his own weapon to bear. And then the human spoke. Its voice was rough, distorted by the mask, but the words were clear. "Stand down." The command was not a plea. It was an order, and for the first time in his life, Dralethian hesitated. Because the human wasn't pointing a weapon at him. It was pointing at the pod, at the other pod still dormant in the wreckage outside. And then the human said the one thing that made Dralethian's blood freeze. "You don't know what you've just woken up." Dralethian's claws tightened around his plasma rifle, the weapon humming with barely restrained energy. His instincts screamed at him to fire, to reduce this insolent creature to molten slag before it could act. But something in the human's stance, in the way it held itself like a coiled spring ready to snap, gave him pause. The human wasn't attacking. It was warning them. Behind his helmet, Dralethian's secondary eyelids flickered, adjusting to the dim emergency lighting of the chamber. The human's armored suit was battered, scorched from whatever battle had left its vessel, a drifting wreck. Yet despite the damage, the way it moved was deliberate, controlled, not like prey. Like a soldier, Vashdor, the lead scientist, hissed from the observation deck above, his copper-scaled fingers dancing across a data slate. "Commander, its biosignature." Dralethian didn't need the readings to know. He could feel it. The human's pulse was steady. No erratic spikes of fear, no chemical flood of panic, just the slow, rhythmic thrum of a predator waiting. And then the human spoke again. Listen carefully. The voice was rough, filtered through the mask's vocal modulator, but the words were precise. That pod wasn't a prison. It was a stasis unit. Dralethian's spines stiffened. Cryostasis. a technology the Dralethian Empire had abandoned centuries ago, too unstable, too prone to catastrophic failure. The idea that these creatures had mastered it, had willingly sealed themselves away in frozen sleep, sent a ripple of unease through him. Vashdor's voice crackled over the comms. "Commander, the wreckage. Our scans detected multiple life signs, more pods, active ones." The human's helmet tilted slightly, as if confirming the scientist's words. "And if you keep poking at them like this, you're going to wake something worse than me." Draltel's grip on his weapon faltered. What could be worse than this? The human shifted, its armored fingers flexing. "You don't know what we were running from." A silence stretched between them, thick with tension. The Dralethian guards remained poised, their weapons trained, but none fired. The human hadn't drawn a weapon, hadn't attacked, hadn't even threatened them. It had simply warned them, and that, more than anything, unsettled Draltel to his core. Because if this creature, this soldier, wasn't the true threat, Vashdor's voice cut through the stillness. "Commander, we must secure the wreckage. If there are more of them," the human's head snapped toward the scientist. "You don't understand." The modulated voice dropped lower, almost a growl. "You think we're the monsters? We're the survivors." Draltel's blood ran cold. The human took a single step forward, and the guards tensed. But it didn't advance. Instead, it reached up and disengaged its helmet seals with a hiss of depressurization. The face beneath was alien, yet unmistakably alive. Pale skin, dark eyes, a scar running from brow to jaw. Human, and in those eyes, Draltel saw something he hadn't expected: desperation. "You need to leave," the human said. Now, and then the ship's alarms blared to life. The deck shuddered beneath them, a deep resonant vibration that rattled the bulkheads. The lights flickered, casting the chamber in erratic pulses of orange and shadow. Vashdor's voice was sharp with panic. "Commander, the wreckage. Something's powering up." The human's expression didn't change, but Draltel finally understood. They hadn't found a derelict. They had found a tomb, and whatever was inside it was waking up. The deck groaned beneath them, a sound like the bones of a dying beast splintering underfoot. The vibration deepened, resonating through Draltel's armored boots, up his spine, into the marrow of his bones. The air itself seemed to thicken, charged with an energy that prickled against his scales. Something ancient, something wrong. Vashdor's claws scraped against the console, his frills flaring in alarm. "Commander, the energy signature, it's not human. It's not anything we've cataloged." Draltel didn't need the data. He could feel it. The wreckage around them was no longer dead metal. It was breathing. The human, Commander Harriman, her nameplate red, didn't flinch. Her gaze remained locked on Draltel, her pupils dilated in the dim light. She wasn't afraid of them. She was afraid of what was coming. "Listen to me," she said, her voice low, urgent. "This isn't salvage. This isn't a fight you can win. You need to go." Draltel's secondary eyelids flicked shut for a fraction of a second, a reflexive shield against the rising static in the air. His mind raced. The humans had always been reckless. Yes, but this wasn't recklessness. This was terror. And then the first scream echoed through the ship. It wasn't human. It wasn't Dralethian. It was something older. The sound slithered through the corridors, a vibration that bypassed the ears and resonated directly in the skull. The guards at Draltel's side staggered, their weapons dipping as their limbs spasmed involuntarily. Vashdor hissed, his claws digging into his own forearms as if to anchor himself against the noise. Harriman didn't move, but her jaw tightened. "You heard them," she said. "Now you know." Draltel's blood ran cold. The archives of the Dralethian High Command were vast, millennia of conquest and knowledge etched into data. Crystals older than their starfaring civilization. Among them were fragments, Whispers of a time before the first expansion, before the Forge, cities had risen. A time when something else had ruled the void, something that had no name because naming it would make it real. The deck lurched violently. A conduit overhead ruptured, spewing molten coolant in a hissing arc. The human's armor sizzled where droplets struck, but she didn't so much as twitch. Draltel's comm crackled. "Commander, the Rex core is reactivating. We're reading mass displacement. Some kind of stars above. It's changing shape." The human's lips peeled back from her teeth. Not a snarl, a grimace of recognition. "Too late," she muttered, and then the walls moved. The metal rippled, as if the ship itself were alive. The bulkheads twisting like muscle beneath skin. The lights died entirely, plunging them into darkness. But only for a heartbeat. Then the glow returned. Not the sterile white of human lumens. Not the Forge. Orange of Dralethian plasma. This was black light. A sickly, depthless radiance that seeped from the seams of the ship, painting the chamber in hues that made Draltel's eyes ache. The shadows didn't just deepen. They coalesced, stretching like liquid toward the center of the room. Toward the human, Harriman exhaled sharply through her nose. "Carter," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We're out of time." From the darkness behind her, a shape resolved itself, another human, taller, broader, his armor scorched and pitted. Captain Ryan Carter. His visor was cracked. One lens shattered, but his grip on his weapon was steady. "Orders, Commander." Harriman didn't take her eyes off. "Draltel Semi as always," she said. "We don't leave anyone behind." And then the thing in the ship woke up. The black light pulsed like a dying star, throbbing in time with some unseen heartbeat. Draltel's mandibles twitched, his neural receptors screaming at the wrongness of it. This wasn't radiation, wasn't energy as his people understood it. It was something older, something that had no place in the cold equations of the universe. And the humans stood before it without flinching. Harriman's fingers tightened around her weapon, her stance shifting just slightly, not retreating, but bracing. Carter moved in perfect sync, his ruined visor reflecting the unnatural glow as he took position at her flank. They didn't speak. They didn't need to. Draltel had seen warriors before. The Dralethian Iron Legions were bred for war, their bodies hardened in the forges of their homeworld, their minds honed to ruthless efficiency. But this was different. The humans weren't just prepared to fight. They were prepared to die, and worse, they seemed unconcerned by the prospect. Behind them, the shadows thickened, twisting into shapes that defied geometry. The air itself vibrated, a subsonic hum that set Draltel's exoskeleton buzzing. His secondary heart stuttered in his chest. "This is what the archives warned us about." Vashdor's voice crackled over the comms, distorted by the interference. "High Commander, the readings, they match the Elder texts." Draltel didn't answer. He couldn't. His gaze was locked on the human commander as she took a single step forward, her boots leaving faint imprints in the dust. The black light recoiled from her, as if repelled by her presence. Then the thing in the ship moved. A soundless ripple tore through the chamber, the walls warping like molten glass. The shadows lunged, tendrils of darkness lashing toward the humans, only to meet a wall of gunfire. Carter's weapon roared, rounds carving through the unnatural mass, each impact sending splashes of that sickly radiance splattering across the floor. Harriman didn't shoot. She advanced, her free hand flicking something at her belt, a small, unassuming device that glowed a familiar, comforting blue. Human tech. Draltel's mind raced. They should have been overwhelmed, should have been consumed. The archives spoke of entire fleets vanishing in the presence of these entities, their crews reduced to hollow shells. Yet the humans fought, not with the precision of soldiers, but with the ferocity of predators. And then Harriman did the impossible. She spoke to it. Her voice was calm, almost conversational. "You don't belong here," the shadows recoiled. For the first time in his life, Dralethian felt true fear, not of the entity, not of the dark, but of the humans who faced it down as if it were nothing more than an inconvenience. Vashdor's voice came again, this time laced with something like awe. "High Commander, they're life signs. They're adapting." Dralethian didn't need the scans to confirm it. He could see it, the way Harriman's pupils dilated, absorbing the black light instead of being blinded by it. The way Carter's damaged visor flickered, not failing, but recalibrating. They weren't just resisting, they were evolving. And then Harriman turned her head, just slightly, and met Dralethian's gaze. "Still think we're the ones you should be afraid of." The ship screamed, and the humans smiled. The ship's scream was not a sound, it was a violation, a distortion of reality itself, a frequency that bypassed the ears and carved directly into the mind. Dralethian's cranial plating vibrated, his neural receptors overloading as the entity's presence pulsed through the corridors like a living storm. Yet the human stood firm. Harriman didn't flinch. Carter didn't retreat. They simply adjusted, their bodies reacting with a speed that defied biology. Dralethian watched, his own limbs locked in primal paralysis, as Carter's damaged visor flickered once more, then stabilized, the fractured display now glowing in eerie, adaptive blue. They were rewriting their own systems mid-combat. Vashdor's voice crackled through the comms, his usually measured tone fraying at the edges. "High Commander, they're bio-readings. They're not just adapting, they're mirroring it." Dralethian didn't understand, not until he saw Harriman's hand, her fingers flexed. And for the briefest moment, the shadows clung to her, not attacking, not recoiling, but warping around her gauntlet like liquid metal drawn to a magnet. Then, with a deliberate motion, she pushed them back. The entity shrieked again, but this time it sounded less like fury and more like recognition. A memory buried deep in Dralethian archives surfaced in Dralethian's mind. The Vahorkai, the ancient texts, spoke of them, not as myths, but as warnings, a species that had once hunted the stars, consuming entire civilizations before vanishing into the void. The Dralethian had believed them extinct, yet here they were, and the humans knew them. Harriman took a step forward, her voice low, almost conversational. "You're not supposed to be here." The shadows rippled, recoiling, not in fear, but in something far worse, understanding. Carter moved beside her, his rifle humming as its energy signature shifted, aligning with the same unnatural frequency as the entity. "Commander," he said, his voice steady, "we've got company." Dralethian followed his gaze, and his blood turned to ice. The walls breathed, not metaphorically, not as some trick of the light. The very metal of the corridor flexed, segments of the Dralethian ship's industrial plating peeling back like flesh to reveal something beneath. Eyes black and depthless, staring from within the ship itself. They had been here the whole time. Vashdor's voice was barely a whisper. "The archives," they called them, the hollow ones. "They don't just kill, they replace." Harriman didn't hesitate. Carter, containment protocol. The human soldier didn't ask questions, he simply acted, slamming a fist against his chestplate. A pulse of energy erupted from his suit. Not a weapon, but a signal. And the ship answered. Dralethian had assumed the humans' technology was crude. He had been wrong. Their systems weren't primitive. They were alive. The walls around them shuddered as hidden conduits flared to life, not with the orange, red plasma of Dralethian engineering, but with the cold electric blue. Humanity hadn't just built their ships. They had tamed them. The entity screamed, a sound of rage, of betrayal, as the very structure of the corridor turned against it. The shadows writhed, trapped between dimensions as the humans' countermeasures forced them into visibility. And for the first time, Dralethian saw the enemy for what it truly was. Not a creature, a pattern, a fractal nightmare of limbs and teeth and eyes, shifting endlessly, never the same for more than a second. Harriman raised her hand, not in attack, but in command. "Last chance," she said, her voice devoid of malice. "Leave, or we burn you out." The entity hesitated. Then, with a sound like tearing flesh, it retreated, the shadows collapsing inward, fleeing through the gaps in reality it had carved. Silence fell. Dralethian realized he was shaking. Harriman turned to him, her expression unreadable. "Now you know why we don't leave anyone behind." Vashdor's voice was hollow. "You fought these things before." Carter's grin was sharp. "Oh, Commander, you have no idea." The ship groaned around them, not in pain, but in awakening, and Dralethian understood, with terrible clarity, that the humans had never been the prey. They were the hunters, and the galaxy had just become their battleground. Section Fe. The trap sprung. The silence that followed was thick, charged with the weight of revelation. Dralethian's claws flexed against the deck, the dull scrape of metal under his talons, the only sound in the chamber. His mind reeled, struggling to reconcile the image of the humans before him, small, soft-skinned, seemingly fragile, with what they had just done. That thing had fled from them, not just fled. It had retreated, like prey before a predator. Vashdor's breathing was ragged, his copper-plated fingers twitching against the scanner in his grip. The readings were impossible, the energy signatures, the way the entity had folded space around itself. None of it matched any known Dralethian science, yet the humans had faced it without hesitation. Harriman turned away from the empty space where the creature had been, her movements unhurried, deliberate. She tapped a command into her wrist display, and the ship's lighting shifted, no longer the dim emergency glow, but a steady, pulsing crimson. The awakening Dralethian had sensed earlier was now undeniable. The human vessel was coming alive around them, systems humming with latent power. Carter holstered his weapon, but his posture remained coiled, ready. His eyes, unnervingly sharp in the gloom, flicked to Dralethian. "You've got questions." It wasn't a question. Dralethian exhaled, the heat of his breath fogging the air before him. "You knew that creature." Harriman didn't answer immediately. Instead, she strode to the nearest console, her fingers dancing across the interface. The screens flared to life, displaying schematics, ancient, fragmented records, some in languages Dralethian didn't recognize. But the images were unmistakable, twisted, shifting forms, fractal horrors. Vashdor stepped forward, his voice hushed. These are from our archives, the old texts, the demons of the void." Harriman's lips thinned. "Your people called them that. Ours had other names." Dralethian's spines bristled. "You've encountered them before." "Encountered?" Carter barked a laugh, bitter and edged. "We warred with them. For centuries." The word settled like a blade between Dralethian's ribs. Centuries. That meant Harriman turned, her gaze locking onto his. "I've been gone a long time, but something woke them up again." The ship shuddered, a deep, resonant vibration that thrummed through the deck. Alerts blared across the consoles, external sensors flaring with movement. Vashdor's scanner screeched a warning. "More signatures. Outside the ship. They're surrounding us." Harriman finished. Her voice was calm. Too calm. Dralethian's blood ran cold. The humans had lured the creature here. They had wanted it to come, and now the trap was sprung. The lights dimmed once more, plunging the chamber into near darkness. Only the glow of the human consoles remained, casting eerie red reflections across the walls. Harriman's voice cut through the shadows. "Lock the bulkheads. Activate the dampeners." Carter was already moving, his fingers flying over the controls. Shields at full, weapons hot. Dralethian realized, with dawning horror, that the humans weren't preparing to flee. They were preparing to fight. And outside, in the void, the shadows began to move. The darkness outside the viewports wasn't empty. Dralethian's secondary eyelids flicked shut, then open again, as if the motion could erase what he was seeing. The void between stars should have been still, cold, and lifeless. But now, it rippled. Shapes emerged from the black, vast and indistinct, their edges blurring like ink spilled into water. The sensors screamed in protest, unable to lock onto anything solid, only registering mass where none should exist. Vashdor's claws scraped against the console, his breath coming in short, panicked bursts. They're everywhere. Harriman didn't flinch. Her hands rested on the command console, fingers splayed, as if she were feeling the vibrations of the ship itself. "Carter, status." "Shields holding," Carter replied, his voice steady. "But they're testing the perimeter, probing for weaknesses." Dralethian's mind raced. The humans had known this would happen. They had planned for it. But why? Why lure these things here, into the heart of their own vessel? Then the first impact came. The ship groaned, a deep, metallic shudder that resonated through the deck, like the tolling of some infernal bell. The lights flickered, and for a heartbeat, the chamber was plunged into total darkness. When they flared back to life, the shadows outside had changed. Closer now, more defined and hungry. Harriman's voice cut through the tension. "Vashdor, tell me about the archives." The scientist flinched. "What? The warnings, the myths. What did your people really fear?" Dralethian's spines flattened against his back. He knew the answer. Every Dralethian child did. The ancient texts spoke of creatures that lurked between the stars, beings of shadow and hunger that had once scourged the galaxy. They had no name, only descriptions, the ones who walk in silence, the devourers of light, and the humans had brought them here. Another impact. Harder this time, the deck plates buckled beneath their feet, and somewhere deep in the ship, something screamed, a sound like rending metal and dying engines. Carter's hands flew across the console, shields at bay. Whatever they're doing, it's not just physical, he hesitated. It's like they're unmaking the energy. Harriman's jaw tightened. Then we don't give them energy to unmake. Dralethian's mind reeled. What kind of insanity was this? To fight something that fed on power by denying it. But the humans weren't hesitating. Harriman's orders came sharp and clear. Cut primary reactors, switch to auxiliary. Carter, reroute all non-essential systems to life support. The ship's hum died. The lights dimmed to a dull, emergency glow. The consoles flickered, their displays shrinking to conserve power, and outside, the shadows paused. Vashdor's breath hitched. They stopped. Harriman didn't smile. For now. Dralethian stared at her, his mind struggling to reconcile what he was seeing. The humans hadn't run. They hadn't panicked. They had outthought a nightmare, and in that moment, he understood the true horror of the ancient texts. The demons of the void hadn't been driven back by force. They had been starved, and the humans had known how to do it. The silence was deafening. Dralethian's claws flexed against the command console, the metal groaning under his grip. The bridge of the Indomitable was a ghost of its former self, dim, quiet, running on the barest trickle of auxiliary power. The great warship, once a roaring beast of plasma engines and thrumming reactors, now drifted like a corpse in the void, and yet it was alive. Outside, the shadows coiled in frustration, their forms flickering at the edges of the ship's failing energy fields. They had no prey here, no feast, only the stubborn, maddening refusal of the humans to die on their terms. Vashdor's voice was a whisper, his copper-plated fingers trembling over the sensor readouts. "They're probing, testing the edges of our shields." Commander Harriman didn't flinch. "Let them." Dralethian watched her, this small, soft-skinned creature who had just done what his entire species had failed to do in 1,000 cycles of war. She stood at the center of the bridge, her posture unyielding, her gaze fixed on the view screen, where the abominations writhed. They should have been weak, fragile, bound by their pathetic need for oxygen, for warmth, for hope. And yet, They had turned their own fragility into a weapon. A low chime sounded from Carter's station. The human captain's fingers danced over the console, rerouting power with the precision of a surgeon. Life support stable. Minimal draw. We can hold this for hours. Harriman nodded. Good. Keep cycling the auxiliaries. Don't let them predict our patterns. Dralethian's spines bristled. Predict, that was the heart of it. The shadows were hunters, yes, but they were stupid hunters. They followed the scent of energy like beasts to a kill. And the humans had simply stopped bleeding. A memory surged in his mind. Ancient texts, etched in molten metal, warning of the demons that had once consumed entire fleets. The Dralethian high forges had crafted weapons of unimaginable power to fight them. They had failed, and yet here, now, these humans had done what his ancestors could not. Not with fire, not with force, but with patience. A shudder ran through the ship. The shadows lashed out, their tendrils scraping against the hull, searching for any spark to devour. The lights flickered, just for a heartbeat, and Dralethian's pulse spiked. But the humans didn't panic. Harriman's voice was calm. Steady. Carter's hands moved again, adjusting the flow. The flicker died. The darkness outside seethed. Vashdor exhaled sharply. There, leaving, and they were. The shadows peeled away from the ship, their forms dissolving into the void, slithering toward some distant, brighter prey. Dralethian's throat tightened. The humans had won. Not by being stronger, not by being faster, but by being still, and in that stillness, he saw the truth of the ancient warnings. The demons had not been defeated by the Dralethian Empire's might. They had been outlasted. And now, after millennia, the galaxy's most terrifying predators had met the one species that refused to feed them. Harriman finally turned to him, her eyes sharp in the dim light. Now we wait. Dralethian could only stare, because for the first time in his life, he understood what it meant to fear something, not for its power, but for its will. The silence that followed was heavier than the void outside. Dralethian warships hung motionless in the dark, their molten, orange energy cores pulsing faintly like dying embers. The creatures, the demons, had fled, but their absence left something worse in their wake. A realization, a truth carved into the bones of history. Dralethian stood at the observation deck, his segmented armor plates shifting uneasily with each breath. The human vessel, Resolute, drifted alongside his own flagship, its hull scarred but intact. It should have been obliterated, it should have been devoured. Yet here it remained, and the humans inside it, they remained. Vashdor's talons clicked against the data console as he scrolled through the recovered archives. The ancient Dralethian texts flickered across the screen, their glyphs distorted by time, but their meaning horrifyingly clear. The hungering ones do not feed on flesh or metal, the records read. They feed on fear, on panic, on the heat of battle and the rush of adrenaline. They are drawn to war like moths to flame. Dralethian's mandibles tightened. The humans had not fought. They had not run. They had waited, and in that stillness, they had starved the demons. A low grinding hum filled the chamber as the Resolute's docking clamps engaged. The humans were coming aboard. Commander Harriman stepped through the airlock first. Her posture relaxed, her eyes scanning the Dralethian command center with quiet assessment. Behind her, Captain Carter moved with the same eerie calm, his fingers resting near his sidearm. Not in threat, but in readiness. Dralethian had seen warriors before. He had seen soldiers who reveled in battle, who burned with the need to prove themselves. These humans were different. They carried victory like a weight. Harriman stopped before him, her gaze level. Your archives confirmed it. Then Vashdor's spines bristled. You knew, not for certain, she admitted. But we've encountered similar things before. Not the same species, but the same nature. Predators that thrive on chaos. Dralethian's secondary heart thudded. And you defeated them? Harriman's lips twitched. Not a smile, but something darker. No, we survived them. The distinction was not lost on him. The Dralethian Empire had spent millennia building warships, forging weapons, honing their strength, only to learn that the greatest threat in the galaxy could not be outgunned. It had to be outlasted, and the humans had mastered that art long before they ever reached the stars. Vashdor's voice was hollow. The archive spoke of a species that resisted the hungering ones. A species that did not fight, did not flee, but endured. His ocular lenses flicked to Harriman. We thought they were myths. Harriman exhaled slowly. Yeah, so did we. Draltel's claws flexed. The demons had not been defeated by the Dralethians. They had been defeated by humanity. And now, after centuries of silence, they had returned only to find their oldest prey waiting for them. Harriman turned back to the viewport, where the last remnants of the creature's presence still shimmered at the edge of the system. They'll be back, she said quietly. Draltel knew she was right, but for the first time in his life, he did not dread their return, because now he was not alone. Now, he stood beside the one species in the galaxy that had already won this war once, and they would win it again. The silence of the command deck was thick, heavy with the weight of revelation. The last echoes of the battle still hummed through the Dralethian warship's conduits, the orange-red glow of their plasma cores pulsing like the slow, steady heartbeat of some great, wounded beast. Draltel stood motionless, his segmented armor plates shifting minutely as his muscles tensed beneath. His claws flexed, the copper-tipped digits scraping faintly against the dark metal of the console before him. The data feed still flickered, displaying the aftermath, scattered debris, the fading heat signatures of the enemy's retreat. But his mind was elsewhere, they had known. The thought coiled in his chest like molten steel. The hungering ones, the demons of Dralethian myth, the scourge that had nearly broken his ancestors, had been real, and humanity had fought them, beaten them. Vashdor's ocular lenses dimmed, then brightened again as he processed the implications. His voice, when it came, was a low, grinding hum, the sound of industrial machinery cycling down after long exertion. The archive spoke of their resilience, but they did not speak of this. His gaze flicked to Harriman standing at the viewport, her silhouette framed against the void. They did not speak of you. Harriman didn't turn. Her fingers rested lightly on the reinforced glass, her reflection a ghostly imprint against the stars. His stories got a way of forgetting the ugly parts, she murmured. Draltel exhaled through his ventral vents, the heat of his breath misting the air before dissipating into the ship's recycled atmosphere. He had spent his entire life preparing for war, training, strategizing, hardening himself for the inevitable return of the hungering ones. And yet, in all his calculations, he had never accounted for this. Not as allies, not as equals, as victors. A chime sounded from the communications array. Carter's voice crackled through, strained. "Commander, we've got something long. Range scans picked up a signal. Old, encrypted. It's repeating." Harriman turned, her eyes sharpening. Origin, deep space. Beyond the system's edge. A pause. "It's not ours." Vashdor's plating flared in alarm. "The hungering ones?" Harriman's jaw tightened. "No, they don't signal. They consume." She strode to the console, her fingers flying across the interface. "Patch it through." The deck speakers hissed, then resolved into a voice, distorted, fractured by time and distance, but unmistakably human. "This is Captain Elias Vance of the Terran vessel Resolute. If anyone is listening, we are still here. We are still fighting. Do not surrender. Do not yield. They can be beaten." A beat of silence. Then, the message looped. Draltel felt something inside him shift. The humans had not just survived the hungering ones. They had left a warning, and now, centuries later, it had reached them. Harriman's hands stilled. Her expression was unreadable, but her voice when she spoke, carried the weight of something ancient. They knew we'd need it. Vashdor's optics flickered. This changes everything. Dralethian looked at the starfield beyond the viewport, at the endless dark where the enemy had fled. For the first time, it did not feel like a void. It felt like a battlefield, and humanity had already marked it as theirs. The silence that followed the transmission was thick, heavy, like the charged air before a storm. Dralethian's claws flexed against the command console, the dark metal groaning under the pressure. His mind, once a fortress of certainty, now churned with something unfamiliar. They had known. The humans had not merely fought the hungering ones. They had planned for this. Centuries ago, drifting in the void, they had carved their defiance into the fabric of space itself, a message in a bottle hurled into the abyss. And now, against all odds, it had washed ashore at the moment it was needed most. Vashdor's optics pulsed erratically, his segmented plating shifting in agitation. The Dralethian scientist had spent his life dissecting the universe into quantifiable truths, cause and effect, logic and probability. Yet this was something else. A species that did not merely react to the dark, but anticipated it, prepared for it, left instructions for those who would come after. Harriman stood motionless beside the console, her face unreadable in the dim orange glow of the bridge, but her fingers traced the edge of the transmission panel with something like reverence. They knew we'd need it. The words settled into Dralethian's bones. He had seen human tenacity before, their reckless charges, their refusal to break even when outmatched. But this was different. This was not desperation. This was strategy. A war fought across generations, a battle waged not just in the present, but in the past and future as well. The realization struck him like a plasma round to the chest. The hungering ones had not merely fled from humanity. They had been hunted. Captain Carter exhaled sharply, his grip tightening on his rifle. He didn't speak. He didn't need to. The set of his shoulders, the fire in his eyes, Dralethian recognized it now. Not just defiance. The humans had never doubted they would win. And now, neither could he beyond the viewport. The hungering ones were out there, licking their wounds, regrouping. But so was something else. Dralethian turned to Harriman, his voice low, resonant with the weight of revelation. Your people did not just survive them. Harriman met his gaze, and for the first time, something like a smile touched the edges of her mouth. No, she said softly. We remembered them, and in that moment, Dralethian understood. The war was not over. It had only just begun. Section Fae. The archive of scars, the Dralethian command spire, hummed with the deep resonant pulse of molten core reactors, their copper veins glowing like embers beneath the fortress. Black plating of the floor. Dralethian stood motionless before the holographic projection, his segmented armor reflecting the orange, red light of the data streams. The air smelled of scorched metal and ionized plasma, familiar, comforting scents that now carried the acrid tang of unease. The projection flickered, displaying fragmented records pulled from the deepest vaults of the Dralethian archives. Ancient warnings, half erased by time, scrawled in the angular script of a dead civilization. Vashdor's claws hovered over the controls, his usually steady hands trembling. They were called the Vatheri, the scientist murmured, his voice a rasp of static through his vocal modulator. The Devourers, the ones who came before. The hologram resolved into a monstrous silhouette, a thing of jagged limbs and too many eyes, its form shifting, wrong, as if reality itself recoiled from its presence. Dralethian's secondary heart stuttered. He had seen this shape before, in the nightmares of his hatchlings, in the oldest war chants of his people. But myth did not leave scars on the hulls of derelict warships. Myth did not carve entire systems into graveyards. Harriman stepped forward, her boots silent against the dark metal. She did not flinch at the image. Her gaze was steady, cold, recognizing. They're why your people never expanded beyond the Helix Nebula, she said. Not a question, a confirmation. Vashdor's spines bristled. You knew. A muscle twitched in Carter's jaw. He didn't look at them. His eyes were fixed on the hologram, on the ghost of something that had once torn through the stars like a storm. Harriman exhaled, slow and measured. We found the ruins first, on Mars. The words landed like a detonation Mars, a dead rock in a backwater system, a human world. Dralethian's mind reeled. The implications unfolded like a blade. If the Vathari had reached Earth's cradle, then humanity had not merely encountered them. They had fought, and they had won. The hologram flickered again, shifting to a new image, a shattered planetoid, its crust peeled back like rotting flesh, its core exposed in a gaping wound, the aftermath of a hunger that could not be sated. This was Kolvar, Vashdor whispered. Our first colony. They left nothing, not even bones. Silence pooled thick and heavy between them. Then Carter moved. A single step, deliberate. His gloved hand hovered over the projection, tracing the ruin of a world long dead. When he spoke, his voice was quiet, rough with something that wasn't quite pity. Yeah, they do that. Harriman's fingers curled into a fist. But they learned. Dralethian turned to her, his pulse hammering in his secondary arteries. Learned what? Her smile was a razor's edge. To fear us. Outside, the void watched, and for the first time in millennia, the Dralethians understood. The monsters of their past had not vanished. They had been running.